Right, for more on Scott Morrison's war of words with the European Union over these vaccines and all those other stories, including the extraordinary press conference at the Chinese embassy, I'm joined from Sydney now by the editor-at-large of the Australian newspaper, Mr Paul Kelly. Paul, the PM's right to point out the fact that his issues in Australia, our issues in Australia, are about vaccine supply, at least until the CSL manufactured in Australia vaccines hit centres around the country and GPs. We received only 700,000 out of the nearly 4 million doses we bought and, of course, paid for. This is an issue, I think, that's cutting through now, the vaccine rollout. How much of it is hurting the PM? Do you think there's detail about what we were missing in doses out of Europe has cut through?
Well, what's hurting the Prime Minister, Peter, and what's hurting the Morrison government is the fact that they promised 4 million doses would be vaccinated by the end of March, and they were way short of that, down at about 700,000. So the federal government is responsible for the vaccine rollout, and this is an extremely disappointing result. We've seen the inflammatory blame game being conducted between the Morrison government and the states, but today we saw another extraordinary process at work with Scott Morrison documenting at great length his dealings with the European Union, pointing out that we were contracted to get 3.8 million doses and 3.1 didn't arrive. So really pointing the finger very strongly at the Europeans, and then saying, as far as their spokesman was concerned, that he welcomed the fact that what they were saying was there would be no further limitations in terms of supply to Australia. So I think we're seeing an extraordinary saga here being played out between Australia and Europe. The Morrison government has clearly suffered very substantially because of the shortages of supply, and the big question is what happens in coming weeks and months.
Yeah, look, I'm with you on the points the Prime Minister made. I read all the material out there. I mean, clearly he is in the right. There's an issue with supply. The Europeans are quibbling about these export orders. But the fact is that the doses, the over 3 million, 3.1 you say, have not arrived. Now, it then falls into a squabble with the states and territories, and then it's the issues of the actual rollout on the ground. But you can't put into people's arms what you don't have as a country. I guess my political question to you is, how much do people understand this detail, or are they falling for the trick of people like the Deputy Premier in Queensland, who's saying that it's all Scott Morrison's fault? You know, where's the community on this, do you think?
Well, look, I think the real answer to that depends upon what happens in the future. I think if the rollout can now proceed fairly effectively during the course of this year, and we're successful in vaccinating most of the population, the 85% of the population, then the fact that we've had these difficulties so far won't be all that great. But if in fact we have more problems with the vaccination rollout, and if in fact we have more disappointment and more failures, then it will certainly become a much greater problem for the Morrison government, and the public, I think, will hold it to account.
Right, talk to me about the propaganda video, 6 minutes or so, all media holed up at the Chinese embassy today. It's all about the issue of the Uyghurs, and we've seen in parliaments around the world, Canada's a good example, declaring it, what's happening in XINJIANG, to be a genocide. I don't reckon I'm the only one who says there's a real feeling of the 1930s at the moment with China, these populations in camps, and great concern about human rights, Paul.
Well, this was just an amazing spectacle today, Peter. We've never seen anything like this. Chinese propaganda in action. And clearly the message from Beijing has got to be that the Chinese government must be very concerned about the global agitation, about the fate of the Uyghurs. And I'm certain that the presentation we saw in Canberra today is not unique. Clearly this is part of a very substantial Chinese government propaganda campaign. the extraordinary thing about it is how hopeless it was. And when you actually see this propaganda exposed to the Australian public and exposed to the Australian media, I think this is completely counterproductive as far as China is concerned. And this sort of propaganda might work in China, and it might work in a range of other countries that don't have a free media. But when you translate this sort of propaganda effort into Canberra dealing with the Australian media, I think all it does is it exposes the limitations of China, and it puts on display the nature of the Chinese regime and the sort of propaganda that it operates inside its own country. I mean, I really do think this was completely counterproductive.
Yeah, but I don't think they're trying to change your mind or my mind or any viewers here in Australia necessarily. This, I suspect, Paul, and we can't tell anymore because we don't have Australian journalists based in China. They're all booted out, as you know. But I mean, this is, I think, as much about domestic consumption. They will be retailing back into Beijing and Shanghai and elsewhere tonight images of Australian journalists being told that the Uyghur population is well looked after and XINJIANG is a wonderful province and all the sort of claptrap we heard today. That will be retailed back to the Chinese consumer. And there'll be a number of mouthpiece Chinese media organisations in Australia who say that, you know, we swallowed it all, hook, line and sinker. I don't know that we were the targets today.
Well, I think you're right about it being played back to China, but I still think as far as a lot of the Australian public are concerned and a lot of the Australian media are concerned and the Australian political system, what we saw on display this afternoon was Chinese propaganda in action. And in one sense, it was chilling. So I do think there is going to be a negative for China as far as this country's concerned and as far as the Australian public's concerned.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. I was a schoolgirl in Canberra, I think about 1988. I went to the Russian embassy, as it was then, Soviet embassy actually. This was before the wall came down, and watched that sort of propaganda video, and it did not change my mind, and I don't think this one will change anyone's mind here in Australia either. Christine Holgate. Now, what's interesting today is how hard she's gone after the board and the chairman, or former board and former chairman for her at least. She's out of Australia Post now. She's gone after them in this Senate submission, but what I thought was extraordinary, you know, she's put a lot of effort in here. This is a 151-page submission into the whole issue of these watches given to senior staff. She was cleared following an investigation by the Department of Finance. It's clear, though, with this submission, she's really after clearing her name in the public domain, isn't she?
Christine Holgate is a very formidable woman. There's no doubt about that. She takes her performance and her reputation very seriously. That's very clear from this submission that she's made. It's detailed, it's forensic, and she is targeting people. She's targeting the chairman. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about this issue. I think this has got a long way yet to run politically. It's very clear from the way Scott Morrison responded today that he wants this issue to go away. But the board and the chairman are in Christine Holgate's sights, and I don't think she's going to let up.
Yeah, if people want some reading over the weekend, if you head to the website aph.gov.au, you can find the submission there, 151 pages. Go for your life. Paul Kelly, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.